You got a case of the quarantine? Well, in this video, we're going to show you how to do a little bit of maintenance on a 3.6 Pentastar. Maybe do a tune-up while you're sitting at home waiting to go back to work. Hey everybody, it's Bo with Exodus Jeeps, and we custom built badass Jeeps. Well, it's a weird time in the world. A lot of you are stuck at home, not able to do anything for several different reasons. If you're stuck there and you ain't got nothing to do, now's a good time to go out and do a little bit of maintenance on your Jeep. Particularly, why not do a tune-up? Maybe you got 100,000 miles on your JK or JL already, and you got a Pentastar engine. We're doing a supercharger install on this customer's Jeep, and part of that is changing out the spark plugs. So we figured, hey, let's give everybody at home something to do, change the spark plugs. Whether you got a JK or JL, it's pretty much the same stuff. There isn't a whole lot of difference in the engine. It's Monday, I gotta go do a bunch of paperwork and stuff to catch up from stuff over the weekend.
Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
So while I'm doing that, Bo's gonna come out here and he's gonna show you guys step by step how to change the spark plugs out on a 3.6 Pentastar.
Bo? 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 Bo?
All right, well, first things first, I'm going to start off by removing this air intake. Get all these hoses disattached from the plenum. Any electrical lines. You don't have to remove the air box, but it makes it a little easier. And there's going to be two 10mm bolts. Two over here, and then two more over here. Always keep a magnet tray just to keep everything organized. It's going to be a vacuum line on the driver's side. There. Sometimes the styrofoam can be a little tight, moving things around, so it's just easier just to take it off sometimes. It's just held in with these two Christmas trees. Tabs. You just sneak it out of there. Just to get it out of the way. There's going to be some 10mm bolts on top. I'll hold the intake down to the lower plenum. There is one in the back. You might end up needing to get a wobbly extension. There's going to be two 10mm bolts, which are holding on this bracket for your coolant lines. Those bolts can actually come out and go in your magnet tray. There were two 10mm bolts on this side. I already took off just due to they're a little bit harder. Just gotta lift it off the studs. This whole bracket will scoot back off of the intake. Now with all the bolts pulled up, to make sure they're all out and loose. If you lift this intake up on an angle, the reason why you gotta lift it up on an angle so you can get the studs out from their brackets. Piece of styrofoam can come off. Now at this point in time, I would recommend to get something to kind of block these holes. You don't want nothing to accidentally fall down in here. Or if you are going to leave it just like that, just be careful when you are working around it. Now you can use rags or blue tape or anything you really want. Just kind of stuff in there just to make sure any dirt or loose debris or bolts or anything you don't want to fall down in here doesn't. Not packing it in there, shoving in, you know, just enough to just keep the dust and debris out. These coil packs are going to be held in with a 10mm bolt. Now that you got that 10mm bolt, you just give it a little pull. And there's one coil pack. You're going to want to get a actual spark plug socket to actually go down in there and grab it. And there's your old spark plug. So right now I'm actually putting a little bit of anti-seize on the threads just to make sure the next time I go to do this, they come out just as easy as they did this time, the next time. Now you always want to thread these in by hand first. You don't want to accidentally cross thread a cylinder. I screw it in until it won't screw anymore. There is a little crush sleeve on there, which you can feel it starting to crush, and then as soon as it gets to the point where it's tight enough, you don't want to over tighten it, but just the right amount. And you can feel it. And you just reinstall the coil pack. So I'll make sure it's down all the way, and you can put your screw back in. And then you would just repeat the process throughout these other two cylinders and throughout the other three. So now on to the passenger side. The more harder one is going to be the one in the center on the passenger side because this metal brackets around it. You gotta move it, you gotta move the bracket around to actually be able to pull the coil pack out to get to the spark plug. Bracket gives you a little bit of a hard time. I just normally go ahead and just disconnect this coil pack completely versus the other ones which I leave connected. Just removing the entire coil pack on this one. And because of the battery box in the way, might have a little bit of a hard time with the extensions. And just like earlier, just a little bit of thread sealer to ensure it comes out easy. And I already went through and made sure the gap was correct on them. As soon as I can't turn anymore by hand, put the wrench on, you can start feeling it starting to crush that little crush sleeve. They don't need to get too tight. So now you just go in and reinstall your coil pack. Get your hands in there and reconnect it. There we go. And then you just retighten the coil pack down to the valve cover. So I'm going to go ahead and install the rest of the spark plugs, and then I'm going to show you guys how to attach the upper plenum to the engine properly. So when it comes to installing spark plugs, I always end up going with like a factory spark plug or whatever the dealership would actually recommend for the engine. I've had problems in the past with aftermarket spark plugs actually causing more problems than good. So I just use a good high quality factory plug, or even just a Mopar spark plug would be good enough. I always end up using a thread sealer on the threads just to ensure as easy as they came out this time, they're going to come out again easy the second time. Always check the gap to make sure it's not closed. Most of the time they do come pre-gapped. And just don't over tighten it and you'll be good. So now we're going to put on the upper plenum back onto the engine. Somewhat similar to the way it came out, you're going to end up putting it back on an angle. Make sure all your gaskets are pushed in and none are coming out. You don't want to forget the styrofoam. Done that too many times. You're just going to want to make sure all your bolts are lining up with the holes on the lower plenum. I'm just going to try to get everything snugged. Make sure everything is seated properly before I go to start torquing everything down. Now at this point in time, I got an inch-pound torque wrench. You might not have one of these at home. You can get a beam style inch-pound torque wrench on Amazon or so, pretty affordably. If you do not have access to an inch-pound torque wrench, just make sure the bolts are not over tight for being in plastic. If you do have an inch-pound torque wrench, it's going to be 71 inch-pounds. Keeping in mind some sort of torque pattern. And the one in the back, you don't want to forget that one. And that is properly torqued down. The upper plenum is attached, and just all your corresponding hoses go back. And all your plugs. Bring the styrofoam forward. Got your little Christmas trees, little tabs that go in. And just push down and hold it. Got this other bracket over here, which goes over top that coil pack I showed you earlier. Those two bolts need to get put back into the intake. There's going to be these plastic bolts. There are two bolts down there, which I'm going to end up getting. They're right down here, attaches this bracket to the bottom of the valve cover area. So there's these two 10mm bolts, which are kind of hard to get to because of the whole battery box. So I got a 10, a wobbly, and a wobbly extension to try to 90 my way up so I can tighten up these two bolts. I end up dropping the socket on it first. The socket has a little bit of wobble, so I'm using multiple wobbly sockets, extensions. Down in there.
Okay, got it.
2 bolts. There, that one's tight. There you go, those are tight. So now with your airbox, it's going to have these 3 prongs which are going to stab into corresponding spots on the body. You can kind of line them up. Makes it a little bit tighter with the PSC reservoir box in here. Got electrical connection. There's actually going to be 2 10mm bolts which actually hold this air intake down, but this customer did not have them on his Jeep, and we're actually going to be taking this off eventually to put on a Hamburger supercharger. For now, we just need to tighten up these hose clamps going from the airbox to the air intake and then over on the intake. And besides putting on the engine cover and cleaning up your tools, the tune-up spark plug change is complete from here.
Well, that wraps it up for the spark plug change. Recommended you do this about every 100,000 miles on a pentastar. Be sure you're using OEM spark plugs when you do this. As Bo mentioned earlier, sometimes the upgraded spark plugs aren't always the best option. Also, Bo mentioned some torque settings that you need to follow when you're reinstalling that plenum. It's very important that you do that. That's a plastic housing. If you crack that by over tightening them, you're gonna let debris in, it's gonna be sucking in. It's gonna change a whole lot of things in this engine if that happens. So make sure you're following the recommended torque settings during your reinstallation. Some other stuff to do during this time, maybe change your air filter out, change it, don't blow it out with air. That's never a good idea. That forced air can cause openings in that filter. You can be allowing a lot more debris through that you may not even know is happening and ultimately causing some major failures inside the engine. So make sure, change the filter, don't blow it out. Maybe take it out, you can tap it up against something, maybe knock some of that loose dirt out, but don't blow it out with air. Yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. For more videos on maintenance, click here and I'll see you guys over there.